The stars beyond Station Azure burned cold and distant, indifferent to the culinary summit that would reshape a galaxy's understanding of food. Princess Velara of the Crystalline Dominion watched a human father unload a battered smoker, convinced this primitive firekeeper was bringing burned meat to mock her table. What she did not know was that in 14 hours, everything she believed about food, patience, and love itself would crumble beneath the weight of a single, perfect bite. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if stories about underdogs changing the galaxy move you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story is even more incredible than this one. The Galactic Culinary Summit gleamed like a jewel suspended in the void. Station Azure's transparent walls, revealing the sweep of nebulae that painters spent lifetimes trying to capture. Inside the grand atrium, chefs from 40 star systems assembled, beneath a dome that shifted colors with the mood of the crowd. Today, it pulsed with electric blue, anticipation crackling through the recycled air. Hovering platforms displayed ingredients that defied Earth physics. Fruits that grew inward, proteins that sang when sliced, spices harvested from the hearts of dying stars. And at the cargo entrance, struggling with a dented black cylinder that belched thin gray smoke, Marcus Reed looked profoundly out of place. His apron was clean but faded, stitched with the logo of a Texas roadhouse that no longer existed. His hands, broad and scarred from years of tending fire, gripped the handles of his offset smoker with the care of a man carrying something holy. Beside him, his daughter Lily, barely 6 years old, hugged a stuffed bear named Smoke and stared wide-eyed at aliens whose biology made her father's textbooks look like fairy tales. She tugged his sleeve, her voice small against the cacophony of clicking mandibles and harmonic throat songs that filled the space. "Daddy, why is everyone staring?" Marcus glanced down, his weathered face softening for just a moment. "Because we're different, sweetheart. But different isn't wrong." From the elevated judge's platform, Princess Velara leaned forward, her crystalline fingers drumming against armrests carved from solidified starlight. Her species, the Velanar, had evolved beyond primitive consumption centuries ago, engineering their biology to process nutrients as pure data, yet they maintained culinary arts as cultural theater. She found humans fascinating in the way one finds insects fascinating, curious, and ultimately beneath concern. When her attendant whispered that the human had brought a smoking device, her laughter chimed like breaking glass. "Burned meat," she announced to the assembly, her voice amplified through neural networks that made every delegate hear her in their native tongue. "The human brings us burned meat, cooked over open flame, as if we were cavern dwellers gnawing bones in the dark." The atrium erupted in clicks, hisses, and harmonized mockery. A Tharkonian chef, his carapace inscribed with 300 competition victories, slammed a claw against his preparation station. "Does he expect us to digest charcoal and call it cuisine?" A Zelfian culinary scientist, her body a shimmer of bioluminescent patterns, activated a holographic display showing molecular diagrams. Combustion-based cooking destroys delicate compounds. It is the methodology of extinction-level primitives. Marcus said nothing. He wheeled his smoker to the station marked with Earth's faded blue marble symbol, positioned in the farthest corner, the spot reserved for novelty acts and participants no one expected to advance. Lily climbed onto a stool beside him, arranging her crayons in neat rows, preparing to draw while her father worked. He checked the firebox, adjusted the dampers with movements smooth as prayer, and began. The princess watched her, crystalline eyes narrowing, already bored, already certain, already wrong. Marcus Reed had not always been a pitmaster. Once he had been a father who cooked on weekends, a structural engineer who understood how metal bent under stress, but never imagined how a heart could. That was before the transport accident on the lunar supply route, before Sarah's laughter vanished from his life like smoke through open air, before he became both parents to a girl who asked why Mommy lived in the stars now. In those hollow months after, he had returned to the only language he knew besides mathematics. the language of fire and time that Sarah had taught him on their back porch in Austin, her hands guiding his as they rubbed spice into meat, her voice soft as she explained that barbecue was not cooking but a conversation between patience and love. He had quit engineering, sold the house, opened a small roadhouse where the only equations that mattered were temperature plus time equals transformation. Lily grew up in the smoky embrace of the pit, her homework completed on picnic tables, her bedtime stories punctuated by the creak of the firebox door. When the Galactic Culinary Summit announced it would accept one representative from Earth's regional cuisines, Marcus had not wanted to go, but Lily had looked at him with Sarah's eyes and said, "Mommy would want you to show them." "Daddy," she always said, "your brisket could change minds." So here he stood, in the lower kitchen level of Station Azure, surrounded by gleaming preparation surfaces he did not understand and equipment that hummed with technologies he could not name. Other chefs claimed the premium spaces near the judges' platform, their stations equipped with quantum refrigeration units and neural interfaces that read ingredient composition at the molecular level. Marcus had a corner with adequate ventilation, a power outlet for his electric starter, and enough clearance that his smoke would not trigger the station's fire suppression system. It was enough. It had always been enough. He lifted the brisket from its insulated container, 15 pounds of prime beef that had cost him 3 months of savings. The meat was cold, dense, marbled with fat that would render slowly over hours of careful heat. He had trimmed it the night before, removing the excess fat cap, shaping it with the precision Sarah had taught him, leaving just enough to baste the meat from within as it cooked. Now he rubbed it with his blend: coarse, black pepper, salt, garlic powder, a whisper of cayenne. Nothing more. His hands worked the spices into every crevice, pressing gently, respectfully, as if introducing the meat to the transformation ahead. Lily sat cross-legged on her cot, coloring a picture of the station with her cheap markers, her tongue poking out in concentration. She had drawn their smoker as a dragon, breathing gentle clouds instead of fire. Marcus smiled despite the weight in his chest. "How long until it's done, Daddy?" 14 hours, baby girl. That's a really long time. The best things always are." He loaded the brisket into the smoker, placed a water pan beneath to catch drippings and maintain humidity, and closed the door. The temperature gauge read 225 degrees, exactly where it needed to be. Smoke, thin and blue, began to curl from the chimney. Marcus pulled up a stool, checked his watch, and settled in. Around him, alien chefs activated their equipment with flourishes and theatrical gestures, their cooking times measured in minutes or seconds. They glanced at the human in the corner with pity and contempt. He did not notice. He was listening to the fire, to the language Sarah had taught him, to the slow truth that would speak for itself when morning came. The judging began at noon, when the station's artificial sun reached its apex beyond the transparent dome and bathed the atrium in light that made every dish sparkle like jewelry. Princess Velara reclined, on her throne, flanked by 4 other judges whose credentials read like a history of galactic gastronomy. To her left sat Commander Thex of the Tharkonian Empire, whose species consumed rock and found pleasure in mineral complexity. To her right, Dr. Zimra of the Zelfian Collective, whose bioluminescent patterns shifted with each flavor she analyzed. Behind them, Master Yovin of the Pale Monks, who ate only once per solar cycle and chose each meal as if selecting a memory to carry into meditation. And, finally, Ambassador Krell, whose fungal biology made him the most adventurous taster, capable of processing toxins that would kill most species. The first presentation came from Zaxthor of the Crimson Nebula, who unveiled a dish called Folded Time. He had trapped a protein in a quantum state, making it exist in 4 stages of preparation simultaneously: raw, seared, braised, and aged. The judges tasted and nodded, their neural implants recording sensation data. Princess Velara's assessment was brief: competent manipulation of physics. 7.3. Chef after chef followed, each more elaborate than the last. crystallized songs that dissolved on the tongue while humming ancient melodies, fruits that bloomed in reverse, their flavors moving backward through sweetness into the memory of soil, a delicacy that made the eater temporarily forget their name, achieving pure sensation without identity. The judges sampled everything with clinical precision, their praise measured in decimal points. When Marcus's turn arrived, the atrium had begun to empty. The overhead display showed his name, Marcus Reed, Earth, Specialty, BBQ. The translation matrix struggled with the word, rendering it as controlled burning of animal flesh. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus wheeled his smoker to the presentation circle, Lily walking beside him with her bear. He checked the temperature gauge, still steady after hours of careful attention. Princess Velara leaned forward, her crystalline features catching the light. The human chef will now present his offering. We understand your preparation requires significant time. Please explain why we should wait for burned meat when we have already sampled quantum perfection. The atrium quieted. Marcus looked up, meeting the princess's eyes. His voice was steady, roughened by smoke and grief. Your Highness, I can't explain it faster than I can make it. Brisket takes 14 hours because transformation doesn't happen on command. I'm asking you to wait because some things are worth waiting for. My daughter waited 6 years to taste her mother's recipe again. I figure you can wait until morning. Silence fell like snow. Princess Velara smiled, sharp as a blade catching light. Very well, human. You have until dawn. But know this. When you fail, the galaxy will remember that Earth sent us patience instead of excellence. She gestured to the chronometer. 14 hours. We shall see if your confidence survives them. Marcus nodded once, accepting the terms as if they were holy, and returned to his corner where the fire waited, and Lily was already asleep. The station's artificial night descended like a curtain, dimming the atrium to a soft twilight that mimicked Earth's moon glow. Most chefs had retired to their luxury quarters, celebrating victories or nursing wounded pride in lounges that served drinks from 17 star systems. The judges withdrew to private chambers, where their assessments would be compiled into official records. Only the maintenance crews remained, moving through shadows with magnetic boots and cleaning implements, their presence as invisible as Marcus had become. He sat on his stool beside the smoker, a digital thermometer in one hand and a data pad in the other. Every 45 minutes, he checked the internal temperature of the brisket, watching it climb with geological patience. 150 degrees, then 160, creeping toward the stall where the meat would fight against transformation. His lower back ached from hours of sitting, but he did not move except to add wood or adjust the dampers. This was the work. This was the prayer. Around 2 in the morning, the smell reached the maintenance level below. It drifted through ventilation shafts like a memory of home, rich and complex, carrying notes of smoke and rendering fat, and something deeper that had no name. Workers began to appear, drawn upward by instinct. A human sanitation engineer named Chen arrived first, following his nose to Marcus's corner. He said nothing, just nodded and sat on the floor nearby, letting the smell wash over him. Others followed. A Martian dock worker who had grown up eating her grandmother's carne asada, an asteroid miner from the belt who had not smelled wood smoke in 7 years. A young couple from the moon colonies who held hands and breathed deeply, their eyes closing against tears. They gathered in a loose circle around Marcus's station, sitting on the cold floor, saying little, content to exist in the presence of something that reminded them of gravity and dirt and tables where people laughed. Marcus opened a cooler and shared what he had: white bread, sliced pickles, a jar of his own sauce made from tomatoes he had grown in his backyard before he sold the house. He passed it around without ceremony. Chen opened the bread and inhaled, pressing it to his face like a compress against a wound. "My mom used to make sandwiches exactly like this," he whispered. Marcus nodded, understanding that this was not about food, but about the things food carries when we are far from home. At 3:15 a.m., the brisket hit the stall. The internal temperature stopped climbing, stuck at 165 degrees as moisture evaporated from the surface and cooled the meat. Marcus had expected this. He wrapped it in pink butcher paper, returning it to the heat, giving it time to push through. Lily stirred on, her cot, mumbled something about dragons, and fell back asleep. The workers began to drift away as their shifts resumed, but they left changed, carrying the smell with them into the station's steel corridors. Marcus checked his watch. 11 hours down, 3 to go. He added another split of hickory and waited. Princess Velara could not sleep. She lay in her crystalline chamber on a bed that adjusted to her biology, surrounded by walls that displayed calming patterns of light. Yet her mind refused to quiet. This had never happened before. Her species had engineered away the inefficiency of racing thoughts centuries ago, installing neural regulators that maintained emotional equilibrium. Yet something had bypassed those safeguards, a nagging sensation she could not name, pulling at her attention like a child tugging a sleeve. Finally, she rose, wrapped herself in robes that shimmered like oil on water, and walked the empty corridors of Station Azure. She told herself she was inspecting the facilities, but her feet carried her toward the atrium without conscious direction. The space was dark, except for emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of blue. The presentation stations stood empty, their quantum cookers powered down. All except one corner where a small orange light flickered like a trapped star. She moved closer and found the human still sitting beside his smoking device. Marcus did not notice her approach. He was leaning forward, one hand resting on the smoker's handle, his eyes half closed in something between exhaustion and meditation. The smell hit Velara like a physical force, so rich and layered that her crystalline biology struggled to process it as data. Her people had eliminated olfactory complexity, deeming it inefficient, but she had retained vestigial receptors as cultural preservation. Now those ancient sensors flooded her consciousness with information she had no framework to interpret. "You are still working," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Marcus looked up without surprise. "Brisket doesn't care about sleep schedules, Your Highness. It takes what it takes." She moved closer, studying the device with fascination. 14 hours. What transformation requires such excessive duration? My people can restructure matter at the molecular level in seconds. Marcus opened the smoker door briefly, checking the bark formation. A wave of heat and smoke rolled out, and Velara stepped back instinctively. He closed it again, adjusted a damper with minute precision. "Because you're not restructuring matter, Your Highness. You're asking it to change itself. There's a difference. That meat started tough, full of connective tissue that would break your teeth, but low heat over long time breaks down the collagen into gelatin. The fat renders and bastes from inside. The smoke penetrates deep, creating flavor compounds that don't exist until they're born in the fire. You can't force that. You can only create the conditions and wait." "Inefficient," Velara said, but her voice carried less certainty than before. "Maybe, but efficiency isn't the only value. My wife used to say that anything worth having is worth waiting for. She taught me that patience isn't empty time. It's active love stretched across hours." Velara's neural regulators flickered. "Your wife. She is not here. She died 3 years ago, but her lessons didn't." Marcus pulled out a worn photograph from his apron pocket. A woman with kind eyes and flour on her nose, laughing at something outside the frame. "She taught me everything about barbecue. Said it was the one cooking method that couldn't be rushed or faked. Either you give it time or you fail." The princess stared at the photograph, at evidence of human fragility and the love that persisted beyond it. She should have left, should have dismissed this primitive sentimentality. Instead, she pulled over a stool and sat. "Then I will wait with you, and you will explain why burned meat deserves 14 hours of a chef's life." Marcus smiled and began to speak about fire and time and the alchemy that happens when patience meets love. Dawn broke across Station Azure like a promise kept, pale light spilling through the transparent dome and painting the atrium in shades of amber and rose. Marcus stood and stretched, his spine crackling with the complaint of a night spent on a metal stool. Beside him, Princess Velara remained, her crystalline features catching the morning light in unexpected ways, softer somehow, as if the night had polished away some of her sharp edges. The smoker's temperature gauge still read 225 degrees, exactly where it had held for 14 hours. Marcus checked his watch, then the internal thermometer he had inserted into the brisket's thickest part. 203 degrees. Perfect. He opened the smoker door and carefully lifted the wrapped brisket onto his cutting board, setting it aside to rest. The meat needed 15 minutes to let the juices redistribute, to allow the final transformation to complete in silence. Footsteps echoed across the atrium. "Doctor." Zimra approached, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with curiosity. She carried scanning equipment that hummed and beeped as it analyzed the air. "I detected unusual molecular activity from my quarters," she said, her voice like wind chimes. The compound complexity readings were impossible for combustion-based cooking. She activated a holographic display that bloomed above her instruments. Chemical formulas cascaded across the projection. Zimra's patterns brightened with each new reading. "This is extraordinary. The Maillard reaction is producing flavor compounds at a rate that matches our quantum acceleration methods, but the molecular structure is different, more stable, more complex." She looked at Marcus with something approaching reverence. "How long did you maintain the heat?" 14 hours, at 225 degrees. 14 hours, Zimra repeated, testing the words for hidden meaning. "We abandoned duration-based cooking because we believed it was inefficient. But you have achieved complexity we need advanced technology to replicate, using only controlled combustion and time." Her patterns shifted to deep purple. The smoke rings penetrate 8 millimeters deep. The protein breakdown is complete but not degraded. The fat is rendered into a self-basting matrix. This should not be possible with primitive methods. "It's not primitive," Marcus said quietly. "It's patient." Other judges began to arrive, drawn by Zimra's exclamations and the smell that now filled the atrium like an ancient song remembered suddenly. Commander Thex's rock-based biology made him immune to olfactory stimulus, yet even he paused, his sensors detecting heat signatures that intrigued his warrior mind. Master Yovin of the Pale Monks sat without speaking, his meditation disturbed by something he could not name but recognized as significant. Marcus unwrapped the brisket. The bark glistened like obsidian kissed by fire, dark and textured, holding 14 hours of smoke in every crevice. He lifted his knife, the blade worn but sharp, and sliced against the grain. The meat fell open like a secret finally told. Perfect smoke rings circled the flesh in pink halos. The texture trembled, barely holding form. Fat and collagen transformed into something that made Zimra's instruments spike and fail. Juice ran across the cutting board, carrying the distilled essence of patience and fire and love, given time to work its slow magic. Princess Velara leaned forward, her breath caught in her crystalline throat, and for the first time in her long life, she felt hunger. The atrium filled as word spread through Station Azure like electricity through wire. Delegates who had dismissed the human chef now crowded the presentation circle, drawn by Zimra's exclamations and the smell that defied every assumption they had made about primitive cooking. The overhead dome shifted from morning amber to bright white, illuminating Marcus's station, as if the universe itself had decided this moment deserved witness. Lily woke on her cot, rubbing sleep from her eyes, clutching Smoke the bear as she watched her father prepare for judgment. Marcus worked with the economy of movement that comes from 10,000 repetitions. He arranged slices of brisket on plain white plates, no garnish, no architectural flourishes, just meat cut against the grain and laid bare. Beside each portion, he placed 2 slices of white bread, 3 pickle chips, and a small ramekin of his sauce, dark as molasses and smelling of tomato, vinegar, and smoke. It was the same presentation he had served at his roadhouse in Texas, unchanged by context or audience, honest as morning light. Princess Velara rose from her throne and descended the steps, her robes trailing behind her like liquid mercury. The other judges followed, forming a semicircle around Marcus's cutting board. The crowd pressed closer, recording devices hovering like insects, broadcasting this moment to 40 star systems where beings waited to mock or marvel. The pressure should have crushed him. But Marcus had learned long ago that truth does not change based on who is watching. He lifted the first plate and presented it to Velara. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with competition. She had sat with him through the long night. She had listened to stories about his wife, about patience, about the alchemy that happens when love is given time to work. She was no longer just a judge. She was a student who had asked to learn. "Your Highness," Marcus said simply, offering the plate. Velara accepted it with both hands, her crystalline fingers trembling slightly. She looked at the brisket as if it were a text written in a language she had forgotten how to read. The bark caught the light, revealing layers of complexity in its dark surface. The smoke ring glowed pink as a promise. The juice pooled at the edge of the plate, carrying the concentrated essence of 14 hours distilled into liquid amber. She lifted a slice with the provided utensil, watching how the meat barely held together, how it glistened with rendered fat, how it moved like something alive and tender. She brought it to her mouth, her neural regulators already struggling to maintain equilibrium, her crystalline biology preparing to process food as data, as information to be catalogued and filed. But when the brisket touched her tongue, every system failed. The flavor hit her like a wave, like a memory, like the universe folding in on itself and revealing something that had been hidden since her people had engineered away the capacity to feel. She tasted smoke and salt and the slow breakdown of protein into silk. She tasted time itself, patient and merciless and holy. She tasted something her species had eliminated millennia ago, when they decided efficiency mattered more than experience. She tasted love, and she wept. Princess Velara's tears were not liquid, but light, refracting through her crystalline structure in colors that had no names in human language. They spilled down her faceted cheeks like prisms breaking, each one carrying a spectrum of emotions her people had buried beneath centuries of engineered efficiency. The atrium fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the station's life support systems became deafening. No one had ever seen a Velinar cry. The biological capacity had been edited out of their genome 800 years ago, deemed unnecessary, wasteful, a remnant of primitive emotional volatility. Yet here stood their princess, tears of light cascading from her eyes, unable to speak, unable to move, her entire consciousness focused on the piece of brisket dissolving on her tongue. Her neural regulators fired desperately, trying to categorize the experience as data, trying to reduce it to chemical compounds and molecular structures, but the flavor overwhelmed every algorithm. This was not information. This was something her people had lost the language to describe. She swallowed, and the sensation traveled through her like a pulse of recognition. In that moment, she remembered things she had never experienced. Sunday tables surrounded by family, the kind her species had replaced with efficient nutrient distribution. Laughter over shared meals, eliminated in favor of solo consumption. The particular joy of waiting for something worth having, traded away for instant gratification. The brisket carried memories that were not hers, but belonged to the human species, encoded in patience and smoke and love given form. "What have you done to me?" she whispered, her voice breaking like crystal under pressure. Marcus said nothing. He simply plated the next portion and handed it to Dr. Zimra, whose bioluminescent patterns had frozen in shocked stillness. She tasted, and her patterns exploded into colors that had no precedent in Zelfian communication, a language her people used only in sacred texts about the time before technological enlightenment. Commander Thex ate next, his rock-based biology theoretically incapable of experiencing flavor. Yet, when the brisket touched his mineral palate, his crystalline eyes widened. "It tastes like the stone gardens of my youth," he rumbled, his voice cracking. "Before the wars, before we forgot why we fought." Master Yovin of the Pale Monks took his portion and ate in meditative silence. When he finished, he pressed his palms together and bowed deeply to Marcus, tears streaming down his ancient face. "I have eaten once per solar cycle for 70 years, choosing each meal as a memory. This is the meal I will remember." Ambassador Krell tasted last. His assessment was simple and devastating. "My people have catalogued 4 million flavor profiles across 900 planets. This is not in our records. It should not exist. Yet it is the most complete thing I have ever experienced." The crowd surged forward, no longer mocking but desperate, their hands reaching toward Marcus's station like pilgrims toward a shrine. Because what they had witnessed was not a competition victory but something far more dangerous. They had watched their leaders break down and weep over meat cooked by a human with 14 hours of patience. Princess Velara wiped the light from her cheeks with trembling fingers. Her composure shattered like glass dropped from a great height. She looked at Marcus with eyes that had seen 1,000 worlds but never truly understood what she had been missing. The other judges stood in similar states of dissolution, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the weight of a single perfect bite. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, murmuring in languages that all expressed the same desperate question. How had a human with a primitive smoker done what their most advanced technology could not? Velara raised her hand for silence. The gesture carried none of its usual authority, only the trembling humility of someone who had just discovered they had been wrong about everything. "I must confess something," she said, her voice carrying through the atrium via neural broadcast. "My people engineered away the experience you just gave me. 3 centuries ago, we decided that efficiency mattered more than duration, that instant gratification was superior to patient creation. We eliminated slow food because we believed it was a waste of resources." She paused, struggling to find words for concepts her language had discarded. "We told ourselves we had evolved beyond the need for such primitive practices. We restructured our biology to process nutrients as pure data, removing the emotional component we deemed irrational. But in doing so, we lost something essential. We lost the ability to experience love through food, to taste the care that goes into creation, to feel the connection between the maker and the made." Dr. Zimra stepped forward, her pattern still flickering with unprecedented colors. "My readings confirm what the princess describes. The molecular complexity in this brisket does not come from the ingredients alone. It comes from the time invested, the attention paid, the care maintained across 14 hours. Our quantum methods can replicate the chemical structure, but they cannot replicate the intention encoded in each moment of patience." Commander Thex, who had spent his life in military efficiency, spoke with uncharacteristic softness. "I have conquered 17 systems and dined with emperors who served me dishes that cost more than starships, but none of them tasted like this. None of them carried the weight of sacrifice and love." He looked at Marcus with something approaching reverence. "You did not cook for victory. You cooked for your daughter, for your wife's memory, for the truth of what food can be when given time to become itself." Master Yovin added his voice, gentle as falling snow. "In my tradition, we say that food prepared in haste feeds only the body. Food prepared with patience feeds the soul. Today, I learned that humans still understand this ancient wisdom that we have forgotten in our rush toward progress." Marcus listened to their words, his arm around Lily, who clutched his leg and stared at the crying aliens with wide eyes. He had not come here to teach anyone. He had come because his daughter believed in him, because his wife's memory deserved honoring, because the truth was worth sharing even when no one wanted to hear it. Yet somehow, in the simple act of smoking a brisket the way Sarah had taught him, he had revealed a wound in the galaxy's understanding of itself. Velara approached him, no longer a princess on a throne but a student before a master. "Will you teach us?" she asked. "Will you show us how to remember what we lost?" Marcus won the Galactic Culinary Summit by unanimous decision, though the judges made clear that victory was the smallest part of what had occurred. The award ceremony felt hollow and strange, ambassadors presenting him with crystalline trophies and offering contracts that would make him wealthy beyond Earth's imagination. He accepted the honors with quiet grace, but declined every offer that required him to stay among the stars. His home was not here, in the gleaming sterility of Station Azure. His home was a small roadhouse in Texas where Lily could run barefoot in the grass and the smoker sat under an oak tree that Sarah had planted. Within months, BBQ spread across the galaxy like a fever that no one wanted to cure. The Velara opened their first smokehouse on their crystalline homeworld, hiring human pitmasters to teach patience to a species that had forgotten how to wait. Tharkonian warriors traded their quantum cookers for offset smokers, discovering that the discipline of maintaining fire for 14 hours was not unlike the discipline of warfare, only aimed at creation instead of destruction. Zelfian scientists published papers on the philosophy of slow food, arguing that their civilization's greatest achievement had been its greatest loss. Princess Velara herself traveled to Earth 6 months after the summit, arriving not with royal fanfare but as a quiet student with a notebook and questions that spilled like water from a broken dam. Marcus met her at his roadhouse, a modest building with a hand-painted sign and smoke rising from the pit out back. She sat at a picnic table scarred with initials and time, eating brisket on white bread with Lily coloring beside her, and wept again because the food tasted even better here, in the place where it was made with love instead of spectacle. "Why did you return?" she asked Marcus, as the Texas sun painted the sky in shades of fire. "You could have claimed any position in the galaxy. Instead, you came back to this." Marcus watched Lily chase fireflies across the grass, her laughter rising like smoke into the evening air. "Because this is what matters. Not the places that want to celebrate you, but the place that made you who you are. Sarah and I built this together. Every board, every recipe, every moment. I'm not going to abandon it for fame or money or the approval of people who wouldn't have looked at me before I proved myself worthy." Velara nodded, understanding, settling over her like dusk. She stayed for 3 weeks, learning to tend fire, to read smoke, to understand that BBQ was not a technique but a language spoken between patience and love. When she returned to her homeworld, she carried not recipes but principles, not methods but truths that her people had engineered away and now desperately needed to reclaim. Years later, travelers across the galaxy would speak of the human who changed everything with 14 hours and a brisket. But Marcus never thought of himself that way. He was simply a father who kept his wife's memory alive through smoke and time, a man who understood that the best things in life cannot be rushed, only honored through patience and tended with love until they become exactly what they were always meant to be.